Hi, this is Mark Wahlstrom, and you are listening to Speaking of Justice, and it's brought to you by the Legal Broadcast Network, the nation's premier independent news, commentary, and educational broadcasting platform for lawyers. LBN is a certified news provider for most major news and search engines, and we provide unique featured commentator programs for lawyers who want to integrate quality video, commentary, and educational content into their firm's marketing, branding, and client outreach programs in a way that meets Bar Association ethical standards. To learn more about the Legal Broadcast Network, go to legalbroadcastnetwork.com. Well, we've got a great guest today, and this is episode 2 of the relaunch Speaking of Justice, and I'm very excited to announce we will be speaking with the legendary Gerry Spence when we go into our second segment. Most people who are in the legal profession know who Gerry Spence is, and there may be some younger listeners who have heard of him but are not familiar with him and not acquainted with him. Just a tremendous trial lawyer. He's the founder of the Spence Law Firm, formerly Spence, Moriarty, and Schuster. He, along with his wife, founded the Trial Lawyers College in Du Bois, I should say, Wyoming. Those guys in Wyoming are particular about that. There's a history in the Du Bois was named, and Gerry is a prolific author. Over 12 books, among them Gunning for Justice, With Justice for None, From Freedom to Slavery, Making of a Country Lawyer, and now his most recent publication, which we're going to discuss with Gerry today, which is Police State. Police State was just published. I believe it just came out in September, October of this year, so it is extremely current. It's published by St. Martin's Press. You can get it on Amazon, Barnes & Noble. You can get it in your bookstores. I picked up my copy at the bookstore. I'm old school. I didn't order it online. And, it is a fascinating read, and it is an extremely timely book. It is a look at how America's cops get away with murder. Now, just today, when we are taping this, we see the spectacle of the Chicago Police Department really coming unraveled in some degrees. The mayor of Chicago giving an almost tearful apology, talking about police reform, issues related to the tragic shooting deaths of young black men in that city that were caught on camera and have become just a disaster and a disgrace for that police department. We see the trial going on today of the police in the Freddie Gray trial in Baltimore. And there is a wave of acknowledgement and a sense in conservatives and liberals and libertarians and ordinary citizens that the police forces in the United States have gotten out of control, that we have reached a point where the police are no longer public servants, but they are our masters. And the same goes for prosecutors, the courts, for-profit prisons. And Gerry's book, I'm just telling you, it could not be more timely. I can't recommend it highly enough. And we want to talk with him today about kind of the scope of his career. But, he has written books at various stages and various times in U.S. history. Some were in the late 70s, some in the 80s, some in the 90s. I mean, he's written and observed the American legal and political system and the criminal justice system for well over 50 years. And his perspective, I think, is invaluable. And, one of the things we want to talk about in Speaking of Justice, and one of the reasons we have this show, and one of the reasons that we're excited about bringing it to you, is having more long-form discussions with people where we don't really come at things with an agenda, but we want to promote discussions in areas around the U.S. justice system, around the U.S. Constitution, around the Bill of Rights, around the U.S. legal system that simply don't get talked about. And, Gerry's books, if you read them and have been to his Trial Lawyers College, if you have had the opportunity to see, one of his many, presentations and speeches to trial lawyers, this is an area that he has talked about and has discussed for years and decades. And I won't beat it to death. We're just going to turn it over to Gerry when we come back from the break and let you all learn a little bit more about it. Those of you who are his fans are going to enjoy it. Those of you who have never had the opportunity to hear Gerry discuss his views and ideas, we just want you to listen in, soak it all in, and we'll be back to you after the break. Okay, this is Mark Wahlstrom. We are back with Speaking of Justice, and I am joined on the phone by the legendary Gerry Spence. Gerry, thank you for joining us today.
It's going to be my pleasure, hopefully.
Well, I hope so too. As you know, I always tell people, I said I try to be objective, but I'm an unabashed fan of Gerry Spence. I read your first book, Gunning for Justice, back in the early 80s, and it had a profound impact on some of my professional decisions. And, Gerry is a trial lawyer, an author, a lecturer. He founded the Trial Lawyers College, and Gerry, one of the things we've talked about, and you've had a remarkable career as a trial lawyer. You've written over 12 books. You've started a trial lawyers college that is thriving, and I find people all the time who say it's been a professional and life-changing event to go there. And you've spent your lifetime defending the rights of people, ordinary citizens, people who are facing injustice, imprisonment, economic loss. And anybody would look at this and say, you've done your share. Why at this point in your life take on a book of this scope and on this topic? What compels you at this time in your life and this point in your career to take on this work?
Well, we've been sensitized to simply accept what goes on in our country, especially in the justice system, as something that is reflected by current television.
Yeah.
By the stories that we see on television that entertain us. The cops are always right. There aren't any real provisions on television for that show the side of the defense attorney.
Yes.
And so, interestingly enough, I've become a sort of a member of that mental set myself.
Mm-hmm. But just as far as being an observer of these shows, and we kind of get indoctrinated into this idea that all is well.
And then after Freddie Gray in Baltimore and his ride to death, and after the killing of Walter Scott with shot numerous times in the back as he ran, and then there was Eric Garner, who died of a chokehold, yes. And Michael Brown shot 6 times, and they were all black men, and they were all unarmed, and most were running. And suddenly, I said to myself, "What is going on in America?"
Yeah.
And then I began to realize something about my own life. I realized that I had never represented a person charged in a court of law, either state or federal. Now listen to this. In which the police, including the FBI, hadn't themselves violated the law.
Wow.
And on one or more than one occasions, even the crime of murder. But I realized that had been my experience. And I thought to myself, could this possibly hint at what is going on in America in the courtrooms today? And since that time, of course, there's come an endless further stream of daily killings by the cops of our citizens. Almost every day, mostly poor, mostly without power, mostly often black.
Yeah. Gerry, when we look at these things, and I was talking with somebody today, and you're not a kid. I'm not a kid. We both look back over years and decades, and heard someone remark. They said this is one of the most troubling times, really, in American history, as far as the legal system that they can remember. And when we look at the last 24 months and the events that happened in the last week, and see these young men gunned down, and then with the terrible tragedy in San Bernardino last week, with what is now a terrorist attack, people being murdered, and all of a sudden people jump up and say, well, we need to have more police, we need to have greater restrictions of freedom, we need to bring these NSA phone sweeps back in and warrantless invasions of privacy. Is this one of the most dangerous times in your recollection regarding the liberty of Americans that you can remember?
Well, I think yes, I think you say that correctly. I think it is one of the most dangerous times in American history. I think we are on the brink of a police state if we haven't already arrived there.
Yeah.
And fear is something, Mark, that breeds our need for protection.
Right. Well,
Too many, maybe most of us are willing to give up their sacred rights of freedom as the price for protection. I hear people say every day, good citizens, I've got nothing to hide, so it's all right to deprive me of my rights if you can only just make me free of fear, if you can only to make me safe. I think we hear people like Trump following the very proposals that led to the Third Reich in Nazi Germany.
Well, and that's a fascinating thing, because I've told people, I said, when you worry about that one event, and people look at it and say, well, 9/11, which was a catastrophe, and you look at the civil liberty restrictions and the things that were given away under the Patriot Act, and you look back at Nazi Germany, and the event was the burning of the Reichstag. Well, we have to impose restrictions on civil liberties and the rule of law in order to keep us safe. Is that the type of thing that you fear at this point? Because we do have this police state, we have this militarized presence among us that really isn't answering to us anymore.
Oh, Trump is saying the very same sort of things that Hitler said. Trump is saying, make America great. Well, that's, of course, everybody wants to make America great. But that's how Hitler began his campaign. And then, of course, Hitler blamed the Jews for any problems, and Trump blames the Muslims.
Yeah.
And Trump is for deporting our foreigners, as was Hitler.
Right.
And Trump wants a very strong military. I think many people would agree with that. But he wants to dominate the world with our military, as did Hitler. And so, and Trump finds most of his supporters, I think, among the uneducated, as did Hitler. So,
yeah.
And the more the press hollers about him, and the more the politicians holler about him, the stronger he gets. So the question is, are we looking at the new Führer?
Yeah, and Gerry, I'll get to one of these because I want to follow up on that in my next question. But first, I want to ask you one thing that really is tied to this, which is, and I'm a historian. You're a historian, obviously, and we tend to look at things across the broad sweep of history because. So I was telling someone the other day, human behavior doesn't really change, but the names and faces and the elements do.
That's very well said. That's very, very true.
Yeah, and when we look at things like Ferguson and last week in San Bernardino, and we see what looks like not a small army, but substantial armies. I mean, the force that is rolled out, the firepower. And you're from Wyoming. People own guns. People are familiar with weaponry. Us in the West, we have a little bit of a different, feeling about and respect for firearms and how they're used and how people have make them part of their life. But when we look at these things, and you bring this up in Police State, you discuss the administrative and judicial power that has grown almost like unchecked and really unobserved by most Americans. But does the militarization of the police serve to purposely intimidate citizens and create this us versus them mentality? And you talk in the book, and I want people to go back and remember this, but Randy Weaver and what happened to him up at Ruby Ridge, and that was 1993. That's over 20, almost 25 years ago. But the firepower brought by our police forces, do you think it's purposely designed to intimidate people, or is it just something that has grown because nobody has questioned why we need to build these private armies inside our country?
Well, you say, is it purposely to intimidate? I don't know that they developed that the militarization of the police was undertaken to intimidate the people, and to create a us versus them mentality. But I will say that that we have become militarized.
Yeah.
Now, that creates a different kind of America than we really want, or that most of us really think we have.
Mm-hmm.
The militarization of the American police, with its corresponding, let's say, indomitable power over the people, brings on a vision of a police state.
Yes, it does.
Remember the German people who actively or passively supported the rise of the Third Reich.
Mm-hmm.
If we listen, you can almost hear the Fuhrer laughing.
Mm-hmm.
And if we listen, do we hear what history has tried to teach us, that when the police become the military, the people become the enemy.
Yeah, and I think that was the thing that shocked people about Ferguson when they saw those clips on TV of what looked like a massive military presence that was just the local police. I think it stunned a lot of people to realize that these police departments have gotten billions of dollars of surplus Pentagon and military material.
That's right. When you see the police running around in tanks, armored cars, with all kinds of military equipment, and the police looking like soldiers, well, doesn't that say it all?
It does. And and I'll tell you, it's difficult for me because I have family members, very close family members, who are career law enforcement and police officers. And we always look at these things, and I think you do a great job in the epilogue of your book. You open it up by saying that, we're not looking at this as being anti-police, but somebody has to talk about these parallels in history and these disturbing trends. And I think you've done a tremendous job in the book, and a brilliant job in the book, sounding the alarm. But let me kind of switch a little bit more to a kind of a hopeful point, at least a hopeful point. But do you think that the actions that citizens can take, ordinary citizens, ordinary Americans can begin to change this, or have we simply lost control that we can't get back? And we talk about these cameras. You have a great idea of, you have some very good common sense reforms, requiring cameras during interrogations, requiring cameras on the police.
I'll talk about that in a minute. But your first question is, what actions can citizens take to bring about change? Well, I question may be, do the people, the voting public, does the voting public even understand that there is a need for a change?
Yeah.
I mean, so much of this rests with the media. Now, I know you are part of the media, and you embrace the media, as do I.
Mm-hmm.
That is from the standpoint of a free media in this country.
Yeah.
But who owns the major media in this country? The major media in this country is owned by corporate America, of course,
Mm-hmm.
and it is a profit-making, profit-seeking set of institutions, and the media, the major media, informs and educates our people.
Right, it does.
And so the people have to become re-informed and re-educated. And who will do that? Where is the media? Where is the means by which that can be accomplished? Individual rights, not cops who fought crime, must become the theme. You know, we ought to be able to open up the television and see ordinary people fighting for their rights. We ought to see lawyers taking on cases against the power structure to fight for the rights of people. There aren't any people's heroes fighting crooked cops on television. There aren't any defense attorneys who are fighting to preserve our rights on any of the shows.
Yeah.
And by the way, Mark, we have to stop children playing war games.
Mm-hmm.
That's all they play anymore are war games. They can't find a game on which the heroes are the citizens fighting for their individual rights and freedoms under the Constitution.
It's true. When you look at the video games, they're all militaristic shooter games, and people who.
So we are raising up warriors, killers, and people who support a warring nation, and indeed we have become and are a warring nation.
You know.
Now you wanted to talk. I thought I heard you say about what we can do to kind of get this thing straightened out.
Yeah, and does social media have a role? I mean, you brought up a point just now that, you know, most of the major media is owned by the people who have a vested interest in the power structure being maintained.
That's right.
But social media, when we look at these situations where we talked about if we didn't have these dash cams, if we didn't have citizens with a phone, you know, and I mentioned in our pre-conversation before we went on the air, I said cell phone cameras aren't identifying any new issues. They're simply a new media tool. It's revealing an existing old problem of police abuse, people being forced into confessions, beatings, and these things have gone on unchecked until you build up this anger that we see in these communities. But to social media and even a show like this, the ability for us to actually sit down, talk, and then distribute this freely, to get your book in the hands of people who can begin to read it and begin to think rather than taking their 30-second sound bites on the news. Do you think we have a real role in that? Does it make you optimistic a little bit that some of that power does get put back in the hands of people?
Well, it's not. We are not hopeful, we have to have a peaceful revolution.
Mm-hmm.
And before we can have a peaceful revolution, that is a revolution that puts the major rights of the people in the hands of the people. It means that our rights become more important to us than our safety. And that people recognize that without the rights of an American, without those rights being preserved, that we'll soon be, if we're not already, lost. So I think to begin with, if we start to look at some simple steps that we can take, it would be very right to say we are not going to have any more forced confessions. All police interrogations from the first hello of the officer to the last goodbye has to be videotaped, every word, absent which any evidence of any admissions or confessions will be held inadmissible at trial against the person who's been accused. See, what happens is Mark, is that the interrogating officer sets this guy down, the accused down in a chair in the room by himself or with a couple of other officers there. He's scared. He's not represented. They begin to interrogate him, and he denies it, and they deny it. And at 5 o'clock of the following morning, he says, "Okay, I did it. I did it. Just whatever I say, I did it."
Yeah.
And that's the only part of the interrogation that lasted for hours under unbelievable circumstances. That is tape recorded. If they tape recorded every bit of it, and it would, the matter would be shortly handled in a court of law. And then I think that all police have to wear, some of them are doing it now, but all police have to wear video cameras that fully reveal their total conduct. And they can't turn them off. If they turns it off, it's presumed to be to be hiding some improper conduct.
Right.
We have to have better psychological testing for cops. Now, the bigger cities claim that they do tests of cops. The major law enforcement officers in this country say that they are testing their police officers. But those tests don't do anything. They don't reveal. They have been proven to be utterly unsuccessful, except for providing the police department the defense of saying, "Well, we tested this officer and he passed." But I have to say that if we can select the most qualified people to travel to the moon, armed with only the American flag, surely we can do a better job of selecting a means by which to select our police officers who travel our streets armed with pistols and clubs.
It's you bring up a great point, and right here in Scottsdale, where I live, we had a police officer, and this won't shock you, even though it's shocking. He killed 6 people over a 9-year span, and the last was a grandfather holding his grandchild and a TV remote, and he was shot from 15 feet in the head. That one resulted in a $14.5 million settlement here, and then he was finally allowed to retire on a disability, getting $4,500 a month. After killing, he shot 7 people, and 6 of them he murdered. 3 of them ended up with legal settlements. But how does, and we'll kind of move to a close after this, but when you look at these things, you're saying, you bring up a great point, is the selection of these officers and the testing of these officers, but how in the world can a police department or a city or community allow somebody like that to stay on the job without massive testing? You
understand, Mark, that that those who seek to be police officers have a need for some reason, some basic underlying need to be in power and to control people.
Right.
And so the self-selecting process is one that could be avoided if for example, we drafted our police,
right,
and let them and had them serve. A carpenter would make, or a music teacher, or somebody that's out, a farmer that's out working the fields, is somebody that doesn't have a need to control and if we could get good young people drafted to do this, let them serve for a year or a couple of years, and let them go back to where they were, pay them a good salary. It might, but this is all dreaming, isn't it?
Yeah. we unless we dream, we never get to where we need to be, though, Gerry. So let me we're kind of getting to the end of our half hour here, and I just wanted to ask you a couple of just get your thoughts. And Gerry, it's obvious to anybody who knows you and does your reading that you love this country, you love America, and you love our Constitution and the goodness and the wisdom of ordinary regular citizens, and you've spent your life fighting to protect the most precious freedom we have, which is the right to a jury trial and judgment by your fellow citizens. And I've told people, we continue to see these people that are giving over to mediations and agreeing to give up their rights to a trial. And, once those rights are given up, they don't ever come back. So I'd like your thoughts just in closing on the appreciation people have for the right to a jury trial and civil rights in general. And how do we start to train our children and adults again, and what you and I growing up used to call civics, and get people this understanding of the unique power of our Constitution and Bill of Rights and to protect individuals? I mean, if we can kind of get your last thoughts on that, it is the last line of defense against tyranny, isn't it?
Well, it is, but what you're asking for is how do we re-educate our people?
Right. Yep.
And that is a long, slow process that comes out of pain. That is the same question that our forefathers, those who created our Constitution, faced. How do we take a people who have been subjected to the sovereignty of the king? And that's where we are today. We are a people under the sovereignty of corporate America and money. How do we take these people and re-educate them? And has been a long, hard process, and it came out of pain and struggle in the establishment of America. It came out of a Revolutionary War, as you remember. It is not what I'm suggesting here, but there has to be a revolution of sorts. There has to be it comes out of pain. It'll come out of the kind of pain that we are beginning to see in this country, in this,
yes,
that are being suffered by the minorities in the country. And when that pain reaches a certain level, the people will say we have to change things, and the people will be heard.
Gerry, that's a wonderful way to end this interview, and I can't thank you enough for taking the time. And we're going to do everything we can to let people know how to find your book. It's Police State: How America's Cops Get Away with Murder. The author and our guest has been Gerry Spence. We will have links to Amazon and Barnes & Noble and all the different places that you can find this. And Gerry, again, just thank you so much, not just for this book, but for a career doing that long, slow, and painful process of not just representing the poor and the broken and the people who are desperate, but also taking the time to educate citizens, but also educate new advocates to pick up this torch and carry it forward. And continue that painful, slow, but hopefully ultimately successful process of reawakening people to the fact that their liberties are being taken away from them.
Thank you, Mark. And I wanted just to say, as I leave you, that your questions have been thoughtful, well thought out, and they are important questions. And it's been an honor to try to talk with you about them.
Great. Thank you, Gerry. Happy holidays to you and your family. And I hope to have you on again sometime in the future. Okay, well, we're back just after a brief break. And again, we want to thank Gerry Spence. Gerry has spent almost 60 years as a lawyer, an author, a lecturer, an advocate. This book, we really, we encourage people to read this because it is a great compendium of cases and situations from the 70s to the 80s to the 90s, specific cases I had forgotten about. People would be shocked to find out that there was a time in Utah where a family who was homeschooling their children it escalated to the point that they were shot and killed over the refusal to release their children to the state for their compulsory, mandatory public education. I mean, it's almost unthinkable now given where we are with charter schools and homeschooling, but there was a time where people were murdered over this. When we look at Randy Weaver and what happened in this, the SWAT team essentially framing again, somebody who is on the fringes of society, creating a violation, surrounding him with marshals and SWAT teams, murdering his child, murdering his wife, shooting these people, and Gerry Spence stepping up and being able to essentially free this person who was going to spend a lifetime in prison. Imelda Marcos, it gets into that story, the abuse many times of the FBI, of prosecutors' offices. We really want to encourage you to get this book. I think you'll enjoy it. I think it is thought-provoking. I think it is extremely well written, and it is a summary of the wisdom and the experience and the bitterly learned lessons of one of the great trial lawyers in American history. So, again, thank you. We will have a link to this. It's Police State: How America's Cops Get Away with Murder, Gerry Spence. And next week, along this line, we are going to take a look at and hope to have in some really thought-provoking and equally high-quality guests to discuss issues around the Second Amendment. It is a big issue right now, post-San Bernardino and what's going on, and the passions are inflamed on both sides of this issue. People who, gun rights, and people who believe that ownership of guns should be restricted. What we want to be able to do is come in and talk about the legal issues involved in this, the constitutional issues. And we try to stay away from politics as much as we can on the show, but people do come in with a point of view, and we honor that point of view, and we want to give them an opportunity and forum to express it. But at the end of the day, we want to really talk about what does the law require. And then the other topic that we really do want to take on is what is going on in college campuses in the First Amendment. How we see professors, speakers, people who do not have popular views being shouted down, losing their jobs, their careers being threatened, being harassed by people who don't feel safe or no longer honor an opposing point of view. Again, it's an issue that harkens back to a frightening era in world history when we begin to see people say that certain types of speech are no longer acceptable or no longer make people feel safe and need to be ended. So went a little bit longer today, but when we get a great guest like Gerry, we give him as much time as we possibly can. And again, we thank him. We appreciate him for coming in. We thank you for listening. This is our second week. We are going to continue to bring in great guests and great topics. Like us on Facebook. Go to Speaking of Justice on Facebook or the Legal Broadcast Network. We mentioned legalbroadcastnetwork.com is our page. And if you have a guest, if you have a topic, if you have somebody you would like to suggest that we interview, just drop me an email. You can find us on Facebook. Send us a suggestion. This is an open forum. We do not discriminate on any one side of the political spectrum. All we ask for is a polite and informed discussion on legal issues. I'm your host, Mark Wahlstrom. It's been a great podcast, in my opinion. I enjoyed it. I enjoyed having Gerry Spence in. We hope to have you back in to listen to us next week. Tell your friends and share the podcast. Thank you, and we'll see you again next week.